Good morning, Year 9. I'm Mr. Caseman, and today we'll be looking at Kamikaze and considering how the themes of power and conflict are being presented and by what techniques the writer uses to present these techniques. There is a handy little clip to begin with for you to watch that displays some of the actions of the kamikaze during World War II. I'd like you to consider how you feel about the pilots and what they're doing, and how do you imagine that they might have felt in accomplishing their missions if they were successful. I'll show you a few seconds of it, and then you can watch that on your own. It's very kind of meta right now. We're watching a video within a video. Okay, oops. And that carries on for quite a bit. So I'd like you to consider, pause this and write down a few ideas about how you feel about what the pilots are doing. What is actually happening, as you maybe have picked up by now, is that the pilots are flying their aircrafts into the enemy ships, causing a lot of damage, but ultimately killing themselves in the process. So I'd like you to think about, how do you feel about the actions of these pilots, and how do you imagine that they might have felt? Some background for you. So this poem is written by Beatrice Garland. It's based on the testimony of a kamikaze, the daughter of a kamikaze pilot, who, unlike many of his fellow comrades, he returned home, which wasn't expected. If you're a kamikaze pilot, you're supposed to accomplish a mission by ultimately destroying yourself and the enemy. But this pilot returned home. It explores his decision. How did he come to this decision to not carry out his mission? But ultimately, the consequences for him for not doing that. He's shunned by his society, his family, friends, neighbors. They don't speak to him. His children eventually stop speaking to him as well. And this isolation and rejection continues for the rest of his life. And I think this poem is actually one of my favorites because it looks at something from an angle we don't usually look at it from. It gives a whole entire new perspective on these men and these people. So the kamikaze during the Second World War were used as I said before, basically tools to fight for Japan in terms of committing suicide to harm the enemy. They're expected to crash their ships, their aircrafts into enemy warships. And the word kamikaze literally translates to divine wind. So I'd like you to kind of think about what that term, kamikaze, and what does divine wind suggest about the cultural views of these pilots. If they were called divine, what does it suggest about them, and how might they have felt about their duty? So you can pause and have a write of that. Write down your ideas, I should say. A little bit more context for you, just to give you a deeper understanding of what's actually happening. I don't know how much you know about Japan. They're quite a magnificent country in terms of their culture. You've probably seen a lot about samurais and samurai swords, and the whole kind of culture is shrouded in a kind of mysterious mystique that has intrigued the world for quite a long time. The term kamikaze comes from a time when ships were sent to invade Japan and they were destroyed in a storm. And that term was used to describe that incident. And then that term was then used to describe these pilots. It's a very spiritual country. They have deep codes with honor and respect. I don't know if you've seen historical clips of what happens if a member of society dishonors their group and their culture. They're expected to perform a ritual where they basically disembowel themselves by stabbing themselves, and yeah, it gets very gruesome. So it's a very strict culture in terms of honor and respect. As a result, when called to kamikaze, many Japanese saw it as their duty and did so voluntarily, because they thought it would bring honor to their families and to their culture. However, if they did not do that, they were disowned. They're treated as an embarrassment, and they would be thrown out or ignored. And people would behave as if they were literally dead. So it is often the choice of being treated like that and being treated as if you were dead, or committing suicide. And I think culturally it was really expected for that, the former to happen, to commit suicide. Okay, so we'll read the poem. We'll just stop and discuss on each stanza aspects of language and aspects of structure. So her father embarked at sunrise with a flask of water, a samurai sword in the cockpit, a shaven head full of powerful incantations, and enough fuel for a one-way journey into history. So I've highlighted the verb embarked to begin with, because embarked literally could suggest, yes, you're stepping onto a plane, but it also has connotations of adventure, something new beginning. And obviously sunrise has positive connotations as well, a time of a new day, a new dawn, a beginning, ideas of life. The word sunrise also connects to Japan. As you saw on the previous slide, it was called Land of the Rising Sun. So we get the idea already that the poet is linking this to Japan. And I'll put a little Japanese flag there to kind of connect this idea of culture, the importance of culture in this poem, as well as the idea of positivity. So in his cockpit, he had a flask of water, a samurai sword, and a shaven head full of powerful incantations. So again, Garland is using these kind of cultural connotations and cultural ideas of what this pilot has. All these things are supposed to be symbolic of his culture. And it is almost like a way of him, a tradition. So it links to the tradition of this journey. So the flask of water, samurai sword, connecting him to culture as well. The shaven head, and this is almost like a ritual. So it's almost a ritualistic beginning. Shaving his head, full of powerful incantations. You almost imagine kind of a spell. And this spell is supposed to be the oath, the Kamikaze Oath that he's sworn. Even today, soldiers have swear to the Queen that they'll protect and do their duties. These kamikaze pilots have sworn to do their duty as pilots for their country. So they're full of powerful incantations. And it's meant to be positive. Yes, everything here, flask of water, they're all connecting him to something bigger than himself. Enough fuel for a one-way journey into history. It sounds almost mythical, legendary. This stanza is a very powerful, positive stanza. A one-way journey into history. They will not be forgotten. They're not forgotten today. Everyone knows about the kamikaze. So he is in history. The pilots are in history. There's a negative idea, though, that it's just a one-way. It's a one-way ticket. There's no return. There shouldn't be any return. The one way suggesting is a euphemism for, obviously, death. He's about to embark on a journey to death. So within this kind of positive tone of everything, the sunrise, embarking, the water, which is supposed to be fresh and rejuvenating, shaven head, the samurai sword, protection, symbol of Japanese strength, and the powerful oaths that he's taking. And this journey into history is very positive, but the idea that this is a one-way journey brings a tinge of almost foreboding to it, something quite uneasy, and I think it is a kind of a worrying idea. But halfway there, she thought, recounting it later to her children, he must have looked far down at the little fishing boats strung out like bunting on a green-blue translucent sea. And I've highlighted that word "but" there because as a connective, it kind of shows that it's not as positive as we first thought. It seems positive, but there's another side to this. Halfway there, she thought. Now, she thought is where we start realizing that this is a narrative. This is being told by his daughter. Okay. Her father, you look at the first stanza, her father embarked. So this is from the perspective of a daughter. She thought, recounting it later to her children, he must have looked far down. So this is her perspective. She's putting herself in his shoes. And she sounds quite sure by using that word must. He must have looked far down. So she's almost trying to convince herself of why he didn't go through with it. He must have looked far down at the little fishing boats strung out like bunting on a green-blue translucent sea. Now, that simile is quite a strong simile. I mean, it immediately conjures up images of celebrations and parties and a vibrant, colorful life. I've selected an image that connects it right there. She's comparing it to the fishing boats that he's seen, and the fishing boats then become like bunting to him. So it's almost like looking at the fishing boats reminds him of celebrations and life and happiness of his culture. On a green-blue translucent sea, so almost that gives another image of a peaceful, tranquil place. However, the blue could indicate that there's some kind of a tinge of sadness within this. This memory could be bringing back, bringing a sense of sadness that this is what the pilot is going to lose. And I think the narrator, the speaker of the poem, is trying to incorporate this idea that there must have been something to drag him back from his duty. And I think this is where kind of the power is that there's power in nature itself. There's power in the memories, in the nostalgia. Nostalgia is the wish and the want of going back to your past, staying somewhere that brings back lovely memories to you. So it's almost like the conflict here as well. The conflict is, does he carry on with his mission, or does he go back to his memories, go back to his past? And I think this is where she's suggesting that he must have been persuaded by the past, the power of nostalgia, the power of nature itself. Next stanza, and beneath them, arcing in swathes like a huge flag, waved first one way, then the other in a figure of 8, the dark shoals of fishes, flashing silver as their bellies swiveled towards the sun. All right, so more imagery now of the ocean and what he's seeing as he's flying. Picture him flying above the great ocean floor, not the ocean floor, the ocean, and seeing this beautiful imagery, knowing that you're going to your doom, knowing that you're about to crash your aircraft into a warship. and be no more, exist no longer. But seeing these images, what must it have done to this pilot? Huge flag wave first one way. Imagine the fish. I've selected an image there of fish, beautiful flashing silver in the ocean. Now, like a flag wave first one way, then the other in a figure of 8. So another strong simile here. And we almost see the fishes swirling around, the fish swirling around almost like a flag. Some would suggest that this flag is almost an image of surrender. When someone waves a flag, it's almost like they're surrendering. So Garland could be using this simile as a way of symbolizing the pilot's surrender, okay? Symbolizing his thoughts of surrender, perhaps. I'd also like to suggest that in terms of the figure of 8 that they make, if you think about the figure of 8, it goes around like a continuous loop. So it's almost, it could be suggested that this indicates also that the pilot is in a loop himself, something he can't escape from. And this loop, this infinite loop, could be his tradition, his way of life, his culture. His culture expects him to do the honorable thing, which is to crash his aircraft, to commit suicide for their survival. If he doesn't do it, he is going to be ignored. He's going to be ostracized, left out, isolated. So he is in effect trapped. And this, I'd like to suggest, this infinite loop is being presented through this simile of the flag surrendering to it, as well as the figure of 8 being trapped within it. The dark shoals of fishes flashing silver as their bellies swiveled towards the sun. Now, you might have heard the repeated sound of S's there and the F's. It's quite sibilant and suggests this kind of peace that would lie within the ocean as well. It's kind of a peaceful imagery for the pilot to imagine and to consider, which kind of juxtaposes his perhaps anxiety and fear of what might be his impending doom as well. So it's a comparison that looks at whether or not he does it or whether he does it. But on one side, there's so much beauty that's being kind of linked to the ocean, flashing silver. Yes, that is a beautiful imagery there. Obviously, it's compared to the dark shoals of fishes. So we have a kind of a contrast here between dark and light. Which will he go to? It seems that they're all around him. They're both elements surround this pilot. Swivel towards the sun. So again, that kind of links the fish to the pilot himself in his aircraft swiveling towards the sun. So that him and the fish are almost very alike. We consider what happens to fish in the end. We almost think, well, he is as doomed as fish. Obviously, the fish live in the ocean, and it's quite lovely to see them and imagine them. And that image there is a beautiful image. But ultimately, what happens to fish is, they get caught, they get trapped, just like this pilot is. So yeah, sibilance being used there, obviously the peaceful elements of the ocean, the colorful imagery of flashing silver is beautiful as well. Images of the sun and swiveling is also positive imagery that reinforces the positive nature, positive elements of nature that persuade this pilot not to carry out his mission, but it also is a dark reminder of his fate, okay? Being trapped, and obviously what his duty is. So he's looking at the ocean, he's looking beneath and seeing the fish swirl around. And next stanza, and he remembered how he and his brothers waiting on the shore built cairns of pearl gray pebbles to see whose withstood longest the turbulent inrush of, I can't see that word, breakers, bringing their father's boat safe. Okay, so another image of cairns there. So he's remembering. Memories are powerful, nostalgia. And nature brings out those memories as well. He remembered how he and his brothers waiting on the shore built cairns of pearl gray pebbles. So cairns, as you can see there, are those little stone stacks that people put to help people navigate. If you've been hiking or walking in Wales or somewhere, you might have seen cairns being put up, sometimes on the ocean, not on the ocean, but on the beach, to help people navigate. So he's remembering him and his brother building these cairns and to see whose would stand the strongest. So childhood memories as well. He's now thinking of the past, bringing their father's boat safe. So his father was a fisherman. So the ocean as a strong kind of memories for him. Now, we might look at this kind of cairn as a symbol as well as navigation. Now, remembering these things, it's almost like it's navigating him. But is it navigating him towards his mission or away from his mission? I'd suggest it navigates him away from his mission. It navigates him more towards, in a choice between life and death, it's navigating him towards life. All arrows with these cairns that he's remembering point to his past, his love of the past, his nostalgia. And therefore, they, just like when he and his brother used to think about whose would stand up strongest, I think the memories, the cairn of his memories is obviously standing strong and bringing him home safe this time and not his father's boat as it usually did. So it's an interesting thing that his memory, his past, is more powerful than his cultural tradition. And the conflict there between culture and between memories, between his past, between life, that contrast and that conflict is pretty strong as well. Yes, grandfather's boat. Safe to the shore, salt sudden awash with cloud-marked mackerel, black crabs, feathery prawns, the loose silver of whitebait, and once a tuna, the dark prince, muscular, dangerous. And what happens here is you can see structurally, the poet starts to employ italics, and these italics indicate the direct speech of the granddaughter, okay? So therefore, we understand that this is being told now by the granddaughter of this pilot. And it seems she's telling this story to her children. Actually, not the granddaughter, I should say, the daughter herself. She's telling this story to her children, and she's saying, yes, this is grandfather's boat, yes? So, as I said before, her father, so everything here is basically being kind of remembered and retold by the daughter of this pilot. But this is where we get more direct with the italics in terms of not being told from a third person point of view, but actually from her first person point of view. So yes, grandfather's boat. In italics, and with these dashes to kind of suggest a break within the story of a third person story to kind of go back into first person narration. It's quite an interesting thing. So this kind of personalizes it a bit more, I think, when it goes into first person, to show the direct feelings of the pilot's children, well, more specifically, his daughter. Okay, so yes, grandfather's boat. Safe to the shore, salt sudden awash. So we get some more sibilance here. Again, this kind of reinforces the kind of peacefulness of this idea of this grandfather's boat returning safe to the shore, salt sudden awash. So culturally, it's a beautiful image of, and soft and peaceful, tranquil. It's come back safe. It's to shore. It's salt sudden. So the salt of the ocean has kind of covered this boat, but it's awash there. And it's lovely. It's a lovely, peaceful image with that sibilance, soft and peaceful. And it's come back with lots of fish, yes. And this speaks to the productivity of the culture, the vibrant life that they've accomplished. They've mastered the oceans, and that kind of speaks to the family's skill. And it quite links to the idea that this grandfather was an honorable father, because he brought things back for his family. So he had this list here of cloud-marked mackerel, black crabs, feathery prawns, the loose silver of whitebait, and even once a massive tuna fish. You can see an image there of that tuna. And all this is supposed to be, on one side, a lovely image of his productivity and the bountiful nature of the ocean and the bountiful nature of the land. Okay, so there's power in nature. It allows him to have these things, but it's also tinged, I suggest, with some of these adjectives that I've used to describe them. So cloud marked, it kind of speaks to the obscure nature of things. If you think about the mackerel, it seems beautiful that they brought this back, but it's cloud marked. It's not clear. Black crabs, obviously we bring in this idea of this kind of dark element of nature. Feathery prawns, so they are again quite light and intangible, possibly easily destroyed. Loose silver, so that adjective again, loose, suggests it's easy to break up. It's not kind of compact. And even the tuna is described as dangerous. So within the life, there's also hints of death. It's also tinged with kind of a warning, a foreboding sense of danger. And the grandfather pulled these things in, and I'd like to suggest that the dark prince, even the tuna, is supposed to be this prince of the ocean. It's muscular, it's dangerous. But even it gets caught in the end. And if we think that this tuna might even represent the pilot himself, who's skilled, he's dangerous as well. He's a powerful element, I think. A pilot who's able to use his craft to have a large impact on people and the enemy without fear of death, considering just his honor, is a dangerous thing. We've seen it in even our modern society, suicide bombers. That is a dangerous element, a person who is willing to take their own life so that they could impact damage on society, has no fear, is very dangerous because they're willing to use themselves as a weapon. So the tuna itself is linked to the pilot. He's a muscular in terms of his skill, in terms of what he has, armed with bombs in his aircraft, willing to take himself down with others, is quite dangerous. But even them, in the end, even that ends up being caught itself. So it seems to have power, but it is powerless in the end, just like that tuna. So using that list of fish there to indicate, the power of nature, but also its powerlessness, and the fact that in the end, it also ends up with nothing. And then we have some more italics now. And though he came back, my mother never spoke again in his presence, nor did she meet his eyes, and the neighbors too. They treated him as though he no longer existed. Only we children still chatted and laughed. And returning to this italics again brings this personal tone back to the poem, where we're getting directly now first-hand experience about what happened to this man. We don't get the story from his point of view, but we get it as close as possible. It's no longer a third person with her father embarked. This is no longer someone writing down what this mother had said. We have now the direct speech from the daughter herself. He came back, my mother never spoke again in his presence. So this is somebody who's telling us what happened to their father. Yes, he no longer existed. So if you think about your modern terminology in terms of being ghosted, this is what's happened to this pilot. He has been ghosted in real life. Don't use that term in your writing because it's more informal, but he's been ghosted. No one's speaking to him. No one's talking to him, even his own wife. So he's no longer existed. So it's almost in effect for him coming back, not accomplishing his task, is in effect a kind of death in itself. And we'll come to that in the last stanza of the poem. Only the children still chatted and laughed. So it's interesting to me that the children still chatted and laughed. And I think those two verbs there suggest the innocence of children. Children they've not as yet been kind of indoctrinated or kind of taught what the culture expects of this man. They still view him as father at that point. The adults do, because they've been brought up in this tradition. So it also speaks to the power of the culture and power of indoctrination. So cultures teach you like what is proper, what is not proper. And as a child, a little child, you don't really know about what is proper and what is right. So, someone tells you it's impolite to do this and that. A child will just do what they want to do. They just run around laughing and joking and running around free and wild. But when you get older, you think, oh, I can't do that anymore because people look at me funny or say things badly about me. But children don't really care about that. So in this sense, we get the childhood innocence, which suggests that it is actually the culture that is powerful. It's actually the culture that teaches people to act this way. The culture has taught his neighbors and his mother that if he doesn't kill himself in war, he is dishonorable. He is not a brave man. He's not patriotic. And therefore, he has no place in their society. But the children don't know that. The next stanza, till gradually we too learned to be silent, to live as though he had never returned, that this was no longer the father we loved. And sometimes she said he must have wondered which had been the better way to die. Okay, so structurally, this italics continues where this mother, the daughter of the pilot, tells the story personally of what happened. We too learned to be silent. So learned, it's very interesting that the poet directly starts saying us that this culture is a learned thing. They learned to be silent, and that is power there. The culture that gives you a life or death sentence, in a sense, through learning. So we learned to be silent. They were taught to live as though he had never returned. So their father is in effect dead to them. Even though he's there, he is dead to them. And that was taught. This was no longer the father that we loved. Now, personally, it's a very strong image of not loving somebody anymore because of what the culture tells you. It's a very powerful image of how a society can determine what people think and how people even feel. So it's very personal there. And I think that's why the writer uses the italics, is to kind of bring it back to that personal feeling of one individual's experience of this. And this individual is directly tied to the pilot. This is the daughter of that individual. So therefore, if we get that personal view from the daughter's perspective, and we find out that this person, this first person point of view, is that they learned this and they had to stop loving their father because of what he did. And that is a very strong thing for us to understand, for us to be able to understand how powerful this culture really is. And then it returns to the third person perspective. And sometimes she said, he must have wondered which had been the better way to die. Now, those final two lines are a powerful way for us to start thinking. He must have wondered. So we get that word again, must. And it's almost like the third person speaker is trying to, and not only her, but not only the speaker, but the mother, the daughter as well. He must have wondered which had been. He must have thought to himself, trying to put themselves into his shoes again, because we don't get his perspective. And I think it's quite interesting. Structurally, we don't get his perspective because I think his perspective is outnumbered by the society that he lives in. It's almost not as powerful as the others and everyone around him. So he is isolated, not just when he returns, but he's isolated in his point of view. We don't get that. He's almost a voiceless character. But others try to speak for him. Others try to show us what he must have thought. He must have wondered which had been the better way to die. And that, in effect as well, makes us start pondering, can there be a better way to die? Are there more than one ways to die? And not just that, but isn't coming home to your family? How can coming home to your family be considered a death as well? So by leaving this ambiguous and leaving this open, the poet kind of makes us wonder as well, makes us think about this experience. We start questioning, which is the better way to die? To crash your plane and in a ball of flames, knowing that people honor you when when you're no longer around, or to say, no, I want to go home to my family. I want to see the fish again. I want to see the fishing boat strung out like bunting. I want to see the dark prints of the tuna. Yes, I want to sail a ship, a boat, and fish. Coming back to that, Is that a better way to be ignored when you do? So the choice is there. Which one would you choose? And I think that's why the poet leaves it on that last kind of unclear question, in a sense. He must have wondered. So that wondering there leaves us wondering as well. Okay. Right. So what I'd like you to do for one of your next tasks is to summarize from what I've been discussing and some of your own ideas of your reading as well. What's happening in the poem? What is the poem about? What is the journey the pilot goes through? How is the pilot presented? What impact is this poem designed to have on the reader? How would it affect their views? So you can consider your own views. What effect did it have on you? How did it affect your views of kamikaze pilots and culturally, or things like that? What themes or ideas are being presented? This could be your extension. Just some short notes about what themes you picked out. Some of mine you might have heard. Obviously, the power and conflict is quite strong, but nostalgia and memories is another one that I've discussed. And what techniques have you discovered as well? Just to summarize and think about what I've just said. So you can pause, you can go back to my video, what I've just discussed, to get your ideas together for that. Okay, so once you've done that, what I'd like you to do is look at the grid below on the video and copy it into your book, getting some quotations together for that and discussing their effects and the devices that you might see. I've done one example for you up here. Poet builds a sense of nostalgia, which is both pleasant but with hints of sadness. For example, the little fishing boat strung out like bunting on a green-blue translucent sea. So what I've discussed here is that this simile has been used to almost present an idea of a celebratory life this pilot has lived. It's very colorful and vibrant. I've looked at the color imagery, how the green links to growth and development, and the blue suggests peace. But I've also looked at the idea of blue as a sense of sadness of what will be lost forever if he continues his mission. And I've linked that to conflict, the conflict between his duty and his desire to return home and his past memories. I think Garland uses the simile and the color to show how attractive life is to the pilot. And ultimately, this is what helps him make his decision. I've put a few quotations here. You could think about your points for these quotations, and then think about the device that's being used and how it helps your statement and how it helps the theme. Another interesting one, the image of the sea is used to portray the range of happy memories tinged with a sense of foreboding and fear. You'd pick out a precise quotation for that. Think about the device that's being used in it, its effect, and how it links to a theme. So I'd like you to just make some notes on this kind of table. If you want to, you can copy into your book, develop it like I have here. This will help you with the main task. This is kind of a planning stage for the main task. So in terms of main task, I'd like you to answer this question: how does the poet approach the themes of power and conflict in the poem? I've selected a few things you could comment on in terms of themes. So conflict, nostalgia, power, death, and you may even think of another theme that I've not touched on. You know, what other idea do you think is quite important in this poem? You're going to use the table on slide 6 to help you, the one I've just looked at. And I'd like you to really show off your skills in this one. Develop an intriguing response that may continue over 2 or 3 paragraphs, even more if you want. This is where you can get to really show off your work so far and show off your understanding of how you can develop each paragraph on various themes and ideas that you think Garland might be trying to transcribe and evoke in the reader. So how does a poet present your chosen theme or themes? Consider the use of poetic techniques and imagery included in the poem. So that includes structure as well, not just language. You could think about the italics, you could think about the dashes. Use quotations to explain them. Okay. And this is what you're going to do to develop your idea. Now, I forgot to touch on one thing in terms of, I'll go back to that. You'll notice as well, there's no rhyming. So it's almost free verse. It is free verse. And this free verse is suggesting that this is an actual recount of an event. So it's almost like someone writing a biography. Yeah, someone telling a story about someone's personal experience in their life. It's meant to reflect the reality of this situation, the reality of this thing actually happening. Now, this precise story might not have actually happened, but we can imagine it having occurred before, where a pilot didn't do his duty and returned home. And this is almost like what would happen. So it's meant to kind of reflect a kind of a reality, which might not be kind of clear if it was like written with rhyming and everything else. This more feels real. It's like someone writing down an actual event. And then we have the italics to kind of personalize it as well. So it's almost becoming more autobiographical as well. So think about the structure as well in your responses, as well as imagery and language. And finally, I'd like you to consider the last two lines of the poem. Do you agree? Did the pilot have to choose between two deaths? Do you think, when it says had been the better way to die, do you think it's not actually a death that he suffered from? He came home, he's not actually dead. Do you think, he's not actually dead, he's actually living, he's just that he's being isolated? So do you think, do you agree with that? Do you think he had to choose between two deaths? And which choice would you have made and why? Okay, just put yourself in their shoes, in the pilot's shoes, and consider that, just to give you closure to this poem in terms of your views. How has it affected you in terms of this final statement of the poem? Okay, so once you've done that, I think that would cover your ideas of theme and of power and conflict in the poem. And we'll continue with another poem next week, or we might do a comparison to finish off your Year 9 introduction to power and conflict. Okay, so until then, stay safe.